A very good afternoon from Government Medical College, Srinagar. I am Mohammed Salim Khan, Professor and Head Community Medicine here. I, on behalf of GMC Srinagar, would thank Dr. Pradeep Agarwal, the country lead for the program regarding front of package labeling in India. We are having the third national webinar today, being co-hosted by GMC Srinagar and AIMS Rishikesh. In this regard, previously we had two webinars. One was hosted by the AIMS Rishikesh itself regarding obesity, and second was by the AIMS Jodhpur on diabetes and FOPL. Today, we are having the third webinar. I, on behalf of GMC Srinagar, welcome all the participants and thank our benevolent, extremely gracious Principal Dean, Government Medical College Srinagar, Professor Samia Rashid, who is also the Dean, Faculty of Medicine and Faculty of Allied Sciences, University of Kashmir, who has accepted our request to be the guest of honor on the occasion, though being very busy, otherwise also in COVID and non-COVID times. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us. Further,
thank you.
My thanks to Dr. Khalid Mahideen, Associate Professor and Head Department of Cardiology, Super Specialty Hospital, Government College Srinagar, and Dr. Rubina Shaheen, who is basically a microbiologist, but she shifted to public health and she did her MD in microbiology from SKIMS and later MPH from prestigious Johns Hopkins. In addition, my thanks to Dr. Sudeep Bhattacharya, who has been all through the program, and he is a very vital link in conducting this program. So before we move to the technical session, I would request our Principal Dean, Government Medical College Srinagar, Professor Samia Rashid ma'am, to inaugurate this program. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. Dear colleagues and students, thank you so much for joining us here today and spending your Wednesday afternoon with us. Wishing you all a very good afternoon. On behalf of the Government Medical College Srinagar, JNK, I, Professor Samia Rashid, would like to invite you all to the first of its kind of webinar. And indeed, it's an honor to co-host a national webinar of this huge magnitude. With immense pride, I would like to mention that this webinar is organized in collaboration with AIMS Rishikesh with the theme of addressing cardiovascular disease through front of package labeling. I would start by congratulating Dr. Pradeep Agarwal, the principal investigator, for taking the lead in this project, and Dr. Salim Khan for serving the project with the capacity of organizing secretary, and Dr. Sudeep Bhattacharya, who is connecting the dots across India regarding the project. Last but not the least, I would like to welcome today's experts on the subject, Dr. Khalid Mahideen, HOD Cardiology, GMC Srinagar, and Dr. Rubina Shaheen, ex-director FSSAI. I must say that the topic is not something that we come across regularly, but it's very crucial, especially in the ongoing times. We all buy packed foodstuff of varying degrees, which has a label as mandated by the Government of India, but we barely care enough to even have a look for these labels. These labels contain important health-related information, which is usually ignored by all of us due to our procrastinating or otherwise habits. We need to realize that this information can be a life-changing exercise for us, which can bring about diet modification changes or behavioral changes in us eventually, preventing us from eating diets which are high in sugar, salts, fats, trans fats, that prevent a lot of lifestyle changes, as we call, in other words, chronic condition or diseases, especially non-communicable diseases, because obesity, diabetes, hypertension, strokes, they're all linked together. Like we know, government has a policy on instructions regarding the label mentioning, not so on the healthy content in the items, though in a little unorganized way. What are the benefits of the label, how challenging it has been for activists to convince policymakers for mandating this label, and what is the way to look forward from it. The technical, social, as well as ethical aspects of this policy have a huge scope for research, and I myself is very interested in taking this as my next project, hopefully soon. Some key learnings on various sub-themes and subtopics will be discussed here today by the very senior public health specialists who are present with us. The introduction for the speakers would additionally require another 1 to 2 hours long webinar, but due to restricted time, let us just conclude with these are undoubtedly the best resources we have in the country right now on this topic. I hope this webinar will be beneficial and an eye-opener on many points for all of us, and I wish best of luck to all of you lovely people who are present here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for a very optimistic welcome note. I, on behalf of the organizing committee, thank you very much for sparing your precious time for this webinar. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Pradeep, would you continue? So I welcome Dr. Pradeep, the country lead, to come up with the introductory remarks about Healthy Food for All project, which he is heading from AIMS Rishikesh. Dr. Pradeep, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I'll just take you through the small brief introduction regarding this particular project. And it is basically focused on cardiovascular diseases and why there is a need to address through FOPL. So that is the main reason. Non-communicable disease contribute to more than 50%. In fact, 62% of the total deaths in India are contributed by non-communicable disease. And in fact, it has been one of the felt need to adopt some kind of regulatory policies based on our scientific evidence so that we can promote healthy eating. Because then only we will be able to address these non-communicable diseases. And one of the main way of this as an intervention is to develop consumer awareness for FOPL, that is front of package labeling. अगर मैं हिंदी में बिल्कुल स्पष्ट कहूँ, कितनी बार हमने कोई भी खाने का सामान लिया है उसमें पीछे सब कुछ लिखा होता है, लेकिन अगर वही जो भी अपना ट्रेड नेम लिखते हैं वहां पर अगर उसके साथ साथ न्यूट्रिटिव वैल्यू या बाकी चीजें that we'll be taking up over here, if it is written in the front, then it is always going to increase the consumer awareness. So we want to give a kind of an informed choice to the consumer before they make a final statement about the purchase. All India Institute of Medical Science is really thankful to the partner organizations to take up this lead. And we have launched a campaign to enable an environment of FOPL by mobilizing the voices among the medical fraternity and public health associations. So that is in brief regarding this whole of the awareness and the webinar. Back to you, sir. Salim, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pradeep, for a brief comprehensive introduction to the program. Now, I would like to give a brief, just 2-minute introduction about the NCDs and.
Sir, would you like to take up the slides from there?
Yeah, I would like to have.
Before that, you are the showstopper. Let me introduce you, sir.
Okay.
So we welcome our first speaker and the organizing secretary of the event, Dr. Salim, and he is head of the Department of Community Medicine, GMC Srinagar, a very active, very dynamic, very down-to-earth person. And he has been a part of the most of the committees, including the state AEFI, head for the NACO, and he is the chair of bioethics, honorary secretary for IMA, Jammu Kashmir branch, and many times you are going to see him on DD News, DD Kashmir. So he is a spokesperson and his voice is being heard throughout India. So from north to south, Salim sir is very famous and he is having a real voice that makes a change possible. Welcome, sir. And we are hereby stopping. You can continue with the slide, or should we take up your video first?
Maybe a slide first, and we can put the video between two main presentations.
Sure, sir. Sure. Back to you, sir.
So I will briefly, is it a slideshow? Is it there? Is it visible? Dr. Pradeep?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I will be briefly talking about the cardiovascular disease epidemiology globally as well as national scenario. So everyone is aware what are cardiovascular disease, but once we talk of cardiovascular disease, they are primarily about 6 types of diseases. They involve where we have the involvement of coronary heart disease, where we see most of the cases occurring globally because of either coronary heart disease or cerebrovascular diseases. Sometimes we have people having peripheral arterial diseases. Now very less rheumatic heart disease, and sometimes the congenital heart disease, and occasionally the peripheral diseases are involved like veins. We have deep venous thrombosis, and occasionally people can have pulmonary embolism and can have fatal outcome. But primarily the first two are the main thrust of cardiovascular diseases which we take. And what are the risk factors for these diseases? In the background of what we are talking about FOPL today, the most important behavioral risk factor of heart disease and strokes are unhealthy diet. So that is our main thrust today. And other than that, the physical inactivity, what we are seeing in this century, even if a child who has moves to the school, just goes through a school bus, then comes down, stays there, takes junk food, comes back, no physical activity, all these things are risk of getting cardiovascular disease. And what we have seen in our setup also, we had a study among the school children in this department, where we found that around 10% of school children were in a pre-hypertensive phase. So a lot of things are happening among young children because of aberrant unhealthy food intake. Then physical inactivity because of availability of transport, other things, a stressful job, lack of facilities moving out. So all these things. Then tobacco use, quite common nowadays. And if we look in our part in J&K, if we talk about J&K also, so around 30% of adults are taking tobacco consumption, so quite high. And again, once we see the use of alcohol, so all these things are risk factors, main risk factors for heart disease and stroke, and that make it to the cardiovascular risk factors. Further, the effects of behavioral risk factors may show up in individuals with underlying disease like diabetes, hypertension already who have, or diabetes mellitus. Maybe what we have seen in one of the studies that over 10% of population in Srinagar is having diabetes, and another 20% is in the pre-diabetic phase. So all these factors do add to the risk factors to cardiovascular disease. Then high lipid profile, aberrant lipid profile, again because of physical inactivity and unhealthy dietary pattern that leads to overweight and obesity. So all these risk factors add to the cardiovascular disease. And once we look into the nidus, into the center point of all these things is the unhealthy diet. So these intermediate risk factors can be measured in primary care facilities and indicate an increased risk of heart attack, strokes, heart failures, and other complications. So if we look at the primary prevention of these things, we need to improve our healthy diet. There are also a number of underlying determinants of cardiovascular disease, and these what we are seeing is the reflection of major forces driving social, economic, and cultural changes. Nowadays, if we look over last 1.5 years, the COVID has played a detrimental role in causing cardiovascular disease because of per se the disease itself, because of having its effect on the cardiovascular system, plus indirectly by people staying indoor, no physical activity, binge eating, all these things have added to cardiovascular diseases. So again, the globalization, urbanization, more and more people are coming to cities, having very less facilities to move out. And while as in the peripheries, in the villages, they had a very healthy lifestyle. And again, the another emerging problem is what we previously used to see a age pyramid. So the apex is getting more wider. The elderly population, about 6%, has already gone beyond 8% now. And over the years, it may become more. So the more aging age group will be there, the more dependency and more comorbidity will be there. So all these things are adding to the cardiovascular burden within the country. So other determinants could be poverty, stress, and hereditary factors. And in addition to drug treatment for hypertension, diabetes, and high lipid profile are necessary to reduce factors. So all these things are adding to the out-of-pocket expenditure, even though there are some schemes to address to this, but still they are causing a lot of burden economically. All these things are important. So once we look at the global scenario of NCD, so cardiovascular disease are the leading cause of deaths globally, and estimate 17.9 million people die from CVDs in the study which came up in the by the WHO in just 1.5 years back. That represents 1/3 of all deaths globally. So if we look, every third death, whatever occurs, is because of cardiovascular disease. So we need to address these things. And one of the risk factors for a major risk factor for CVDs is the unhealthy diet. So of these deaths which occur, 85% are due to heart attack and stroke itself. As I said, among the CVDs, these two are the major causes and outcomes. So over three-quarters of CVDs take place in low and middle income countries. And because of having low budgetary allocation towards health and not very established health facilities, so the outcome of these diseases is that more people die of because of these cardiovascular emergencies. Out of the 70 million premature deaths under the age of 70 due to NCDs, 38% were because of cardiovascular. So once we look, as I said, out of overall estimation, 1/3 of all deaths globally are because of CVDs, and we need to address the causes of CVDs. So if you look at this presentation, again, if you look at a 2-decade change in the CVD, almost you can see how much rise has been in the CVD, total number of people who have died. So from 6.8 million in 2000, it has reached to 8.89 million. So 2.1 million more people have died in these years because of ischemic heart disease itself. Then if we go to the stroke, again, stroke is again from 5.5 million to 6.2 million people have died because of stroke. So these are the two major causes of deaths globally. Coming to the national level. So again, if we look at the scenario in the country from 1990 to 2016, the scenario in 25 years, how much it has changed. So CVD used to contribute to just 15.2%. There were other causes of death like communicable diseases or nutritional problems, other things. But once we look back, almost again 28.1% of deaths are occurring because of cardiovascular disease. So this is the major killer in the country now. It's not the communicable disease like tuberculosis or malaria or other things, but the CVD and associated diseases because of those. And if we look at the disability adjusted life years, again, a lot of people are getting affected, and it affects not only their function but the economic development of the country also. So 23.8 million prevalent cases of ischemic heart disease were estimated in 2016, and as against 6.5 million and 6.5 million strokes. So there has been a 2.3 times more increase in both disorders in these 25 years. So this was published in Lancet recently. Again, different countries have different states have different. I won't take much of the time. But if we look at the risk factors among them also, so the dietary risk factor is the main cause of this disease. So 56.4% of cardiovascular dialysis are because of dietary risk factors associated with high systolic blood pressure. Once again, salt is incremental in that. Then air pollution because of urbanization and more vehicular traffic, industrialization, high cholesterol. Again, it's related to a diet, tobacco consumption, and high fasting blood plasma. So all these, if you look at the red mark, they are all related to the diet. So diet has a major role in causing cardiovascular diseases. So this is again, once we look at the risk factors, dietary risk factors, again the top level for stroke, again the top level in both the ischemic heart disease and the stroke. So if we look at some of the states, we can see more, the prevalence is quite high in many of the states, showing the red one. Now it's emerging more like cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, stroke, rheumatic heart disease. Now it has gone a bit down, but the overall, the number of cases are growing exponentially among these countries. Same way among the various states of the country. Same way the systolic blood pressure and the high cholesterol. So more and more cases are high prevalence is occurring in this. So summing up, the diet is playing a major detrimental role in causing cardiovascular disease, and over these years we have seen less and less people are going to conventional kitchen cooked food and moving to ready to eat food and more packaged food, and what we see that moving out of homes and going to fast food chains, take. And nowadays we see many food chains coming up and people ordering. So especially in the developed cities and metropolitan cities, even the smaller cities like ours, people are now moving out and calling those fast food chains to get their regular meals. So over these years, we see a lot of things happening, lot of dynamical changes occurring in our food pattern as well as food consumption. So more and more trans fat is being consumed, more high salt and sugar is being consumed. So all these things lead to cardiovascular disease. And once we look at the cardiovascular disease because of the food consumption, we are hardly concerned about what type of constituents are in their food. So our aim for this session is to address those things. So I will just sum up and thank you. I will just thank you for bearing with me for this introductory presentation. It was just a brief idea that over these years we have seen a lot of things, a lot of cases occurring because of cardiovascular disease, and most of them occur because of unhealthy dietary pattern. Thank you very much. Now I request Dr. Khalid Mohideen to present the first.
Before that, we would like to play something very innovative of yours to all.
Dr. Khalid, can you just
sure.
close your
I will stop sharing slides for a while.
Okay.
Sir.
अभी आपने ये बिस्किट उठाया?
जी सर।
तो किन के लिए है?
ये सर बच्चों को खाने के लिए।
तो आपने देखा इसके अंदर क्या है?
नहीं सर, वो तो नहीं मुझे पता है।
इसके पीछे कुछ लिखा होता है, आपने कभी पढ़ा है?
लिखा तो है सर, छोटा छोटा लिखा हो, लेकिन मैंने कभी पढ़ा नहीं है।
ओके। आपने ये क्या उठाया?
दाल।
तो किस लिए?
खाने के लिए, अपने लिए।
आपने इस पे देखा है इसका कैलोरिक वैल्यू क्या है, इस पे क्या क्या डिटेल्स होती हैं?
नहीं, मैंने नहीं लिखा।
इसके पीछे देख लीजिए, कुछ लिखा होता है ये यहाँ पे। तो आपने पहले कभी गौर किया है?
नहीं।
क्या आपके लिए ठीक है, नहीं ठीक है?
नहीं।
क्या ये पढ़ना ज़रूरी है, आपको लगता है?
हाँ, लगता है ज़रूरी।
तो आगे जाके आप ये सब चीज़ें पढ़ेंगे?
हाँ, मैं पढ़ूंगा।
आपके हाथ में क्या है? किसके लिए है?
मेरे लिए।
तो आपने देखा कि इसमें क्या क्या चीज़ें होती हैं, इसका वैल्यू, कैलोरिक वैल्यू क्या है, इसके अंदर क्या है?
नहीं।
तो पीछे से देखिए, इसके कुछ लिखा है यहाँ पे, ये डिटेल्स आपने देखी है, इसके क्या लिखा है? कभी पढ़ा है आपने इसके अंदर क्या होता है?
नहीं।
तो आप पढ़ लीजिए क्या लिखा है इसमें। जो इसके अंदर न्यूट्रिटिव वैल्यू है वो इस पे लिखे होते हैं। तो ये क्यों ज़रूरी होता है? कोई आइडिया है आपको? नहीं है। चलिए। तो मैम, आपने ये पैकेज उठाया, किस लिए उठाया आपने ये?
बच्चों के लिए।
तो आपने इस पे देखा कि इसके अंदर क्या क्या न्यूट्रिएंट्स हैं, क्या चीज़ें हैं?
नहीं, वो तो नहीं देखा।
इस पे एक लेबल होती है छोटी सी, बैक साइड पे आप देख सकते हैं। तो इस पे आपने चेक किया क्या उनके लिए ठीक है या नहीं?
नहीं, मैंने तो सिर्फ एक्सपायरी देखी है।
तो इसको देखना ज़रूरी है कि नहीं?
जी, जरूरी तो है आइडियली।
तो क्या चाहती हैं आप, ये लेबल जो है
वो थोड़ी बड़ी होनी चाहिए, विजिबल रहनी चाहिए, ताकि ये पहले नजर उसी पे पड़े।
तो आप चाहते हैं कि फ्रंट पे एक पैकेज होनी चाहिए?
जी जी।
थैंक यू।
Yes, sir. We can see your slide, sir. Khalid, sir.
Thank you.
So we welcome Dr. Khalid Mohideen for his presentation as the main speaker for the day.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
So, Honorable
chairperson, respected faculty, metaphysically present audience, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. At the outset, I must thank Dr. Salim Saab for giving me an opportunity to speak on the topic. And in the meantime, all the more thankful for doing my job, because after his talk, I have hardly anything to say. Industrialization in a society makes it financially secure and begets it an economic transition. All economic transitions in turn lead to an epidemiological transition. That is a fundamental principle of epidemiology. This all happens because of a sedentary lifestyle, because of the availability of the motorized means of transport, because of the availability of the smoking, the citrus. All this leads to hypertension, diabetes, obesity, coronary artery disease, and strokes. A very important link between an economic transition and an epidemiological transition is something what we call as a nutritional transition. As Salim Saab rightly pointed out, that cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death globally. 1/3 of all deaths are because of the cardiovascular disease now. That too, as he rightly pointed out, in the LMIC, the low and middle income countries, coronary artery disease now being the disease of the poor. 1951, the Massachusetts taught us that there are some risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, age, smoking, and gender, which are called as conventional or the Framingham risk factors and account for the 50% of the total burden of the cardiovascular disease. The remaining risk factors for the burden sit elusive. In my country, we have the highest number of the hungry people, and 50% of all deaths in men and women are attributable to the dietary factors as per a report in 2015. It was basically in 2013 that Professor Carlos Monteiro from Brazil, the Sao Paulo University, identified that there was a rise in the obesity in the Brazilian population from 3% to 13%. Brazil is a society which do not get much of the sugar or the oil from the market. They found that there is something else at work. What his group said was that it is the problem of processed and particularly ultra-processed food, which people end up eating in large quantities and end up having the epidemic of obesity, hypertension, and diabetes. For the purpose of a serious nutritional research, academia, and acceptable to the World Health Organization, instead of using the terms like the junk food, like the convenience food, they came up with a very formal classification, what is known as a NOVA food classification system, which classifies the food not by the type, but by the stage of processing. We have unprocessed food as the type 1 food. We have the culinary ingredients, salt, sugar, butter, oil. We have the processed food that we make in our kitchen at home, which essentially is a combination of the type 1, the unprocessed food, and the type 2, the culinary ingredients. The trouble does not stop here. Processed foods are not that bad. Processed foods are as old as the first quarter of salted pork which crossed the Atlantic. Trouble is that with a special kind of a food that happened as a consequence of corporatization of the food, when corporate interfered between the farm and the fork. What these profit-making company did was they made what Marxists or the leftists call as a pseudo food. What scientists, what the nutritional researchers say is an unhealthy food. This food has a definition. Ultra-processed food or UPF are basically industrial formulations made with no or minimal whole food. and produced with substances extracted from food or synthesized in laboratories such as dyes, flavoring, preservatives, and the emulsifiers. Unfortunate part of the story is that 58% of the total consumption of the food in the US is an ultra-processed food, the UPF. 25 to 56%, 60% of the diet in Europe is an ultra-processed food. Chinese say that they cannot do without it. Many countries are saying it is impractical not to use it. So, why is ultra-processed food a poor food? It is calorie dense, it is nutrient poor, it is high in sugar, it is high in sodium, it has unhealthy fats, it is low in fiber, it is low in micronutrients, it contains additives like heterocyclic amines, acrylamide, polychromatic hydrocarbons, furans, and emulsifiers. While we are preparing the potato chips, cookies, bread, and caramel candies, we end forming some of what is known as the neoformer contaminants like acrylamide from the fried potatoes and biscuits, acrolein from the caramel candies. We have the data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Study and the Louisville Health Study that these are associated with an increased risk of a cardiovascular disease. Packaging material, as Dr. Salim Saab was showing that packaging material and the food, bisphenol A, it is present in the plastic packaging and has been associated with the cardiometabolic syndrome. There is an observational data to show that non-unsurprisingly, the epidemic of obesity, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and cancer are clearly associated with the use of ultra-processed food. I have been assigned the job of trying to search for an evidence between an ultra-processed food and a cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease, or CAD, henceforth in the talk would mean a transient ischemic attack, an ischemic stroke, an intracerebral hemorrhage, a heart attack, a heart failure, a claudication, a peripheral vascular disease in different permutations and combinations. I will have two types of evidences to show that there is a relationship between ultra-processed food and a cardiovascular disease, the CVD. One would be the mechanistic, second would be the clinical epidemiological data. We all know that high risk of the carbohydrates and sugars. Molisani study shows that this accounts for the 36.3% of the trouble created by an ultra-processed food in a cardiovascular system. The food structure in an ultra-processed food that has a degraded food matrix. There are acellular nutrients. It is a low satiety potential. It is a high glycemic index. It induces oxidative stress and ends up having dyslipidemia, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and a cardiovascular disease. Dr. Agarwal, my central theme of the talk would be the concept of microbiome dysbiosis induced by the ultra-processed food. Human being is composed of 10 trillion cells, and we have 100 trillion plants in the large intestine, what is known as microbiota. Its material is called a microbiome, and this microbiome genetic material is 20 times more than the human genetic material. When a human mother feeds a human child, it is not just nourishing the infant. In the human milk, we find something what is known as carbohydrate oligosaccharides. These are not meant for feeding the child. The infant intestine does not absorb it. This is the mother feeds the child's plants in the intestine. This is just used by this gut microbiome. We can understand in our co-evolution between this gut microbiome and the human beings, how we have grown together, how nature has ensured that we are together, and what has the ultra-processed food to do with it. The acrylamide, the emulsifiers, the acrolein, and other things, what they do is they alter the gut microenvironment from the friendly environment to a pathobionts or pathological bacteria which induce a gut inflammation. I need to reiterate that whole cardiometabolic syndrome might be an open and shut story if we understand that intestine is basically a chemosensor. When a person takes a food, there is a production of a substance from the signals of the intestine called ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hunger curer, and there's a satiety, and we stop taking further. The gut inflammation induced by the ultra processed food, altering the microbiota, and a gut inflammation, a dysfunction of this sensor, the no production of the ghrelin, and an epidemic of obesity, and a low satiety potential of these drugs. Sub-Saharan Africa and India, we are very surprising. In the same society, we have undernourished children and the obese children. If the food supplies of a country are okay, why is one undernourished? Why is other obese? The obese of part of malnutrition is because of an ultra-processed food. Does this surrogate mechanistic evidence translate into clinical evidence? The answer is yes. Where is the evidence? I have 4 studies and a meta-analysis to quote. The 4 studies are Nahan's 3rd study, the French study of 1 lakh Nutrient Santé. We have the latest published this month in the Femigam Offspring in the Journal of American College of Cardiology. We have very important Italian study, the Molisani study, which is all the 4 studies clearly showed that each proportional increase in the intake of different higher quartiles or quintiles of an ultra-processed food down the line translate into an increased cardiovascular mortality, increased incidence of all-cause mortality, and increased risk of the depression, increased overweight, and the obesity. So there is now very clear evidence that from the mechanistic evidence as well as observational evidence that there is an association between an ultra-processed food and the occurrence of the coronary artery disease, occurrence of a cerebrovascular disease. Beyond that, the problem would be addressing the issue of reverse causality, which was taken care in the Framingham Offspring study by not including those patients who had a coronary artery disease at the base, proving the causality is an issue. 1, how can you expose one patient population to a hanikaric food and follow it over a period of time? 2, it will be very difficult to control the food intake in these patient population. To further reiterate the importance of the microbiota in the obesity, if we get the fecal matter from the mice which are well nourished and transplant it into the mice which are well nourished, which are undernourished, we find down the line they put on a weight. So this puts off our banking theory of the calorie intake. How does a pandemic meet an epidemic? What is the story of the COVID-19 pandemic and an ultra-processed food? I have 2 examples to quote. Italy, March 2020 to May 2020. There was a lockdown in Italy. There was a tremendous rise in the use of an ultra-processed food for the reasons of non-availability, transport, and economy. These similar voices were recently raised by one of our faculty members about the potential of a rise in obesity in the children in one local daily, occurring the COVID-19 potentiating the use of an ultra-processed food and an epidemic of hypertension, obesity, diabetes, and the coronary artery disease. Last but not the least would be how to curb the menace. Taxation is okay. Front of the pack labels are okay. Effective marketing controls are okay. But one of the most important thing is our Indian policy. Should FDI be allowed to handle the ultra-processed food? We were taught that affluence made us obese. FDI will ensure that low and middle economy in our country end up using these ultra-processed foods, and like sub-Saharan Africa or the Mexicans, for example, there will be going to a rise in the ultra-processed food. Last but not the least is from this intellectual colossus, Yuval Noah Harari saying that obesity is a double victory of consumerism. Initially, this corporate sells the sweet drinks, potatoes, chips, hot dogs, ice creams, and hamburgers. Change our phenotype, we become obese. After that, what will they sell us? Diabetes drugs, statins, insulin, stents, ICDs, heart failure drugs, and pacemakers. With that, I am very thankful for a very patient listening this summer afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very enlightening, scientifically evidence-based presentation regarding the ultra-processed food. It was really a brainstorming session from your voice coming from your heart, and the words which were being given over there was really mind and thought provoking. We are really very thankful to you, sir. Now, Salim, sir, can we have the next presenter? Yes, ma'am, we can see your slides.
Okay. So thank you so much. And I'm thankful to the respected principal madam who has actually come and to attend this national webinar on this important issue. And I am also thankful to the organizers of this webinar who have given me an opportunity to actually talk on this issue. Thank you so much. So I'll be just putting my another slide that this most of our speakers and Dr. Salim as well as Dr. Khalid has actually addressed, but we can also see that who is at risk with everyone, like children, adult, elderly, they are all vulnerable to these risk factors. And especially if we call of unhealthy diets, this and malnutrition, these are a very important risk factors for our non-communicable diseases, which already has been discussed. So I'll be talking, so if we see in this slide, we can see that, the dietary risks are an important contributing factors for the non-communicable diseases. And there are other factors like we have high plasma glucose, fasting plasma glucose, we have other low physical activities. But now, since I have been associated with Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, so I'll be focusing mainly on the dietary risk factors. So if we see the specific dietary risk factors that are contributing to this disease burden, we can see that these are all the dietary risk factors which have been contributing as a contributing risk factors for this disease. And out of that, we can see that how high sodium and high trans fat has equally been very important factors to the disease burden of various diseases, not only cardiovascular diseases. So to talk about India, we see that there are premature deaths are occurring due to non-communicable diseases. And in men, we can see that about 30% of the deaths are happening because of non-communicable diseases, whereas by 2015 and 20% deaths are attributed in females. And if we talk of the non-communicable disease in our country, 63% of all deaths are accounted to non-communicable disease, out of which 27% are due to cardiovascular disease. So that means unhealthy diet. So the healthy diet is one of the key responses that we can be adopted to reduce the incidence of these non-communicable disease. So both we have to check both the supply as well as demand side interventions, so that we actually have to, we can say from the supply side, we have to take the industry people on board and give them, train them so that they produce healthy options for the consumers. Whereas the demand side, we have to educate our consumers so that they go and buy healthy and eat healthy foods. So the critical factor which is in this battle against non-communicable disease is a food system. So in this food system, it's not only the food, it's the whole environment, which will include like physical environment, economic, policy, social, cultural conditions of the country, and how people are shaping their dietary choices and nutritional status. So it will have to be balanced between the malnutrition and as well as the underweight and overweight and obesity. So all these factors have to be taken care of. So what is the vision? As a Food Safety Standards Authority of India, as a part of it, the vision was to transform India's food safety and nutrition environment. So that was to be done by bringing out certain regulatory regulations, by building capacity and working in collaborative way with the industry as well as with other academia and health experts, and also empowering approaches, like we empower our people so that they also have to work in the field, especially in the country like India. So in that case, we were working on that so that we advance our public health and improve the quality of life in future, especially for our future generations. So to talk about front of package labeling, FOPL, as we know that this is a very important policy tool that has been adopted by many countries, and even India is actually working on it so that we also get and implement this policy tool to help consumers to make a healthier food choice. So what is FOPL? It was introduced late in 1980s by some non-governmental organizations, but today we see that many different organizations and even other NGOs and government agencies in food industry and health experts are working on it and developing different methods of systems of FOPL. So what is the main principle why we want is that because we want, even though we have a packaging regulation in place where on the back of the food we have all information, but to make it more convenient, relevant and readily understood nutrition information and it, so that it gives a guidance to the consumer, that he makes an informed purchase and healthier eating, develops healthier eating choices. And in addition to that, it's also giving a beneficial effect, additional benefit to the like manufacturers, so that they favorably make a compositional change in the food and make it available at the retail stores. So front of label, that's what I have already been talked in the previous, which I talked in the previous slide, is basically we have to have a present it has to be presented on the front of the package. That's called the principal display panel of the packet, and it can be done on all the foods, especially where we have to have a thresholds. And it actually is thresholds are to be developed as per the nutrient profile model, which our country, India, is using a Southeast Asian region nutrient profile model along with the ICMR guidelines. And on the basis of that, they are putting up threshold for some of the nutrients which are to be looked after. So not that every food item will require that threshold. So these are the guiding principles for FOPL system. Like we have to select the nutrient, like which nutrients we need to limit. Say like we talk about fat, salt, and trans fats, and these are to be limited. And which nutrients are to be encouraged? Like we have to encourage fruits, vegetables, which are high in nutrient but less in calories. And single versus multiple nutrient. This is how we have to develop this system. Reference value is actually how much energy it is giving, a serving per 100 grams. So it is calculated based on that. Design means it has to be easily understood and it has to be interpreted. Like a commoner, like a consumer who doesn't know anything about nutrition, and he should be easily able to interpret that whether it is a healthy or an unhealthy food. And consistency means we need to either make it a mandatory or it has to be a voluntary scheme. So talking about the types of FOPL systems, so we have two major categories, that is interpretive and non-interpretive. So if we talk of non-interpretive, it can be simply what right now we have, or we can have a nutrition specific system that will display the information of the contents of a given nutrient. So it may be in the form of a numerical intake, color coding labeling, or it could be a warning label or octagon label like which are using in Chile. And there are summary indicator systems can be used where we have an overall assessment, like it could be either a Nutri-Score or it is a healthy star rating that's used in countries like New Zealand and other. And there can be endorsement logos, like it's a healthy choice, say it is say some green tick or something like that. Or we can have a food group information system where it will include the symbols that indicate the food group, that it is more in vegetables, fruits, or food ingredients that are important for the diet. For example, cereals, grains, and all that. So this is the example, like if we talk about the interpretive, it can be nutrient specific, like we are giving in this, you can see the colors also, but at the same time, it's giving the numerical values as well. But if there is a summary indicator, it will just be an indicator, like it can be a health logo, like a tick, or it can be stars. Whereas the non-interpretive will be like people like a commoner, he will just have per cup is giving this much, then it may not be at times much understood by a common person or a common, but still it will give us a better information, still gives an information about the healthy diets. So this is actually the country, many countries are already have actually adopted this FOPL system on the packaged food, and some of the countries have made it mandatory, and in some countries it's still a voluntary scheme. You can see like in countries which are colored as orange, there it is voluntary, whereas the red one are where the scheme is mandatory, and these are the logos which they are using in their food packets. So to talk about the regulatory part of this, like how India and what internationally is done. So we know that we have a Codex Alimentarius Commission, and in that we have a Codex Committee on Food Labeling that is called CCFL, and they already are working on labeling requirements in what are to be applied on the products which are being internationally marketed. So under the section 5 of this Codex Guideline on Nutrition, the Codex Alimentarius have identified 3 types of nutrition labels. One is the nutrient declaration that is already there, nutrition and health claims if somebody wants to make some health claim on their food, and then they are also working on supplementary nutrition information, and that is where they are including the front of pack labeling. There's what are the requirements. So this is still under work, this is still going on, the work is still going on, it has now come in place right presently. So now if we go for like what is the status of FOPL in India, so we can talk about what are the regulations, what policies and other initiatives have been given by FSSAI, that's Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, that has helped influence the food habits of the consumer so that we inculcate or nudge consumers to eat healthy. So from the regulatory perspective, we can see that there are various regulations that are in place. For example, one important regulation, which was already a principal regulation in place, that is when the Act and the regulations were enforced in our country, was the Food Safety and Standards Labeling and Packaging Regulation 2011. So that was an existing and principal regulation that was applicable from the beginning of the when the act was enforced. And then the newly notified regulations that has come up is the Food Safety and Standards Safe Food and Balanced Diet for Children in School regulation that was notified in 2020. And this regulation actually is a regulation which restricts the sale of high fat, salt and sugar food in schools. So this is how this is actually talking about at which foods are to be actually should be present in the school canteens, and within 50 meters area of the school, no high salt, fat and salt food should be sold. And it also restricts the endorsement of these high salt, fat and salt sugar foods for children, especially the advertisements and endorsement by these celebrities. Then we have one more which was one more regulation that came into force, that was actually an amendment in the existing regulation, that is Food Safety and Standards Prohibition and Restriction on Sales. This is the second amendment of this regulation, which came into force in 2021. And this actually talks about the limits of trans fatty acids, which should not be more than 2% by mass of the total oil or fat present in the food. So it is actually taking care of trans fat in the food, which is an important risk factor for our cardiovascular diseases. So now I'll just briefly talk about what actually Food Safety and Standards Packaging and Labeling Regulation 2011 talks about. So this was the principal regulation which was present, but now this regulation has been revised and has been developed into 2 separate regulations as under. First one is the Food Safety and Standards Packaging Regulation 2018. It has already come into force, and it only talks about, most of the content of this regulation is talking about the packaging, like what should be the packaging material, whether it should be food grade and everything about that. Then we have food safety and standards labeling and display regulation 2020 that has been notified, and this actually was this FOPL was a part of the draft regulation of draft of this regulation only. So you can see that in this regulation we have a definition on front of pack, means part of the package that faces forwards in the principal field of vision, and is typically the first thing the consumer will see when they look at the product. So this regulation actually has been amendment. This is an amendment. It has been notified on November 17th, 2020, and but it will be enforced from 1st of January 2022. So this regulations now, what is actually this prescribes? It prescribes the labeling requirements of a pre-packaged foods and also display of essential information on premises where food is manufactured, processed, served, and stored. So it is actually relates to the display of information in food service establishments and mandates the establishments which are central licensee holders to mention the calorific value against the food items and displayed on the menu cards or whatever they are serving in their establishment. So what I was saying that in the draft of this regulation, FOPL was a part of it, but since now it has been delinked, which I'll tell you in the coming slides, what the reason for that. So these are the salient features of the proposed labeling regulation. So these are all that has to be present on the pre-packed food. That's the name and ingredient list, nutrition information, declaration regarding the vegetarian, non-veg logo they have to put, what food additives they have put, and what is the name and complete address of the manufacturer, FSSAI logo and license number, date marking, lot number, net quantity, and instructions of food, and even country of origin if it has been imported from other country. So to talk about the progress on what FOPL regulatory status is in India, we can say that FSSAI actually set up an expert committee on junk foods in school in 2013. And this all started with a strong recommendation that we have to strengthen the nutritional labeling and front of pack labeling also regarding calories, sugar, fat, saturated fat, and salt. But then in 2015, the committee of 11 members, which was led by Dr. Prabhakaran, to assess the consumption of. So they were actually want to see the assessment. Like obviously the country, the food habits vary from country to country. So we need to have an assessment about what is the consumption of fat, salt, and sugar in India, and what is its health impact. And once this was done, the FSI came up with a draft food safety and standard labeling and display regulation 2018, and FOPL was a part of that at that time. But then FSSAI issued a draft notification in 2019, but delinked this FOPL from the general labeling regulations. And now the FSSAI is still working. The working group, which has an expert group that has been developed by FSSAI, is working on the thresholds for FOPL in consultation with the civil society, industry, and nutrition experts. So they want to come up with some viable model which will be applicable for India, for our country. So this was actually what was presented in the draft. So how the front of label packing will be applicable, which will be actually implemented in India. So it will be having, we will have two parts in that. It will be sort of a traffic signal type, but it has two parts. Part one will be which will have a declaration on the amount of energy, saturated fat, trans fat, added sugar, and sodium per serving. And part two will actually depict the per serve percentage contribution to RDA, that is recommended daily allowances, and the calculation will be made on based on the per serving percentage contribution to RDA, which will be based on 22,000 kilocalorie, which actually is an approximate energy requirement, approximately daily energy requirement for an adult Indian. And this is how much fat, and this is 2 grams of trans fat, and if 50 grams of sugar and 5 grams of salt is a requirement for an average adult per day. Based on that, this will be done. So suppose if we talk about the front of pack labeling for high fat, salt and sugar foods, it will be colored red if the total sugar exceeds 10% of the energy provided by 100 gram or 100 ml of the product. So if we see here, it is showing 32%. That means it's more than 10%. So it has to be marked as red. So no depiction of blocks in the above said nutrient or nutrient is required means that is the nutrient is absent in the product. So or it is meeting the threshold. So to talk about the regulatory status, I have already told you that it was a part of a draft FOPL, part of food safety and standard labeling and display regulation. But this was the draft. Actually, it has two things in major important things that was in that was the model high fat, salt, sugar model that was to be displayed and the nutrient threshold for food categories. So right now the status is that the working group is still working on the threshold, so that and taking into consideration the WHO Southeast Asian Regional Nutrient Profile Model and as well as the ICMR guidelines on nutrient. So once these recommendations of the working group will be finalized and it is as per a procedure, it has to be then referred to the scientific committee for endorsement, and after that the scientific committee will approve it. It has to go for the approval of the food authority, and after that the food authority will once approves, it has to be notified as an amendment to the existing this regulation only, and it will be placed on the website of the FSSAI for the public comments or even suggestions from other stakeholders before it is finally notified. So this was about FOPL status, but now I can talk about some of the other initiatives which can be which were actually started in order to inculcate healthy eating habits in our consumers. So this initiative was started as a movement called Eat Right movement in 2016, but now it has taken a full-fledged shape of an Eat Right India. So under this initiative, the FSSAI took up three different ways of working, that is initiations of certain these programs. Like we have from the supply side, they started a program on training and capacity building of food business operators called FOSTAC. This was a food safety training and certification system, wherein the food businesses were specific sectors of the food sector was taken people who are handling the food were trained and they were then certified as food safety supervisors. And then there was another from the same supply side initiative was a benchmark and certification schemes, where we had a cluster, like we have clean street food hubs, we have hygiene rating scheme, we had hygiene rating scheme for restaurants, for meat shops, for sweet shops. And then for demand side, the consumer awareness building programs were initiated, and in schools, in colleges, and there were also some initiatives which helped in addressing the issue of adulteration. Like we have food safety on wheels. This was actually these are the mobile vans or testing vans which are being provided to all the states, and these vans have been used for screening of the food products and also for generating awareness among consumers or the people. And the book like DART, where every information on adulterant and how it can be tested at home levels is given. That if we talk about the eating enabling healthy choices, some of the initiatives which at FSSAI started were food fortification and reduction of salt, sugar and fat and trans fat, which I have already talked about, and I'll just give a brief about it. So enabling healthy choices like food fortification, we with the help of Tata Trust started a food fortification resource center at FSSAI headquarters. As we know that fortification is a very, very effective intervention where we can actually tackle the problem of malnutrition. So it is actually addition of vitamins, minerals, iron, iodine to staple food which is being consumed at a larger scale by a population. And these nutrients may be originally present, but during processing they are lost, and during that is why we need to fortify these foods. So the main objective of this center is actually to educate people about the benefit of fortified foods, and also sensitize the states about fortification of food and promote them in the safety net programs. And also they give a capacity building of the small scale industry manufacturers, so that they enable them to produce fortified food. So this is all how this resource center is working. So talking about trans fat, as I have already said, that we have a regulation which has come up, but before that, the FSSAI started a trans fat free India at 75, and we want to have a trans fat free India by 2022, 1 year ahead of the WHO this target. So that way, we started at FSSAI. They have started a two-prong mechanism, both from the demand and supply side. That is, from the supply side, they have taken in confidence the industry people like bakery associations, oil and other manufacturing associations, who have taken a pledge that they are going to reduce the trans fat levels in their food products by 2022. So this is how it came, and reduction in fat, for salt and sugar has already been done like through this regulation on school and high fat, and there are guidelines which have been provided by FSSAI to that is in the public domain. So this is all about what initiatives we have taken at FSSAI to actually address the issue of non-communicable disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rubina, for a very elaborate presentation on regulatory mechanisms regarding front of package labeling. It must have opened a lot of questions and things which we need further to, and a lot of things we learned about role of FSSAI and what you have been doing all these years. Thank you very much for your elaborate presentation. Now, Dr. Sudeep, you will take up the next session, or?
Yes. So thank you very much, our excellent speakers. We have very much enlightened about your knowledge and wisdom. Starting from the epidemiology, the burden, Salim sir has described the burden. Next, Khalid sir has already discussed the brainstorming things, just like microbiome, gut microbiome, Ghadlin, and these kind of things. Next, we know about the changing food behavior, front of package labeling. And lastly, Rubina ma'am has already excellently described the latest updates of FSSAI. So there are many questions. I cannot think that I can take all the questions. It would be pleasure to discuss all the questions, but due to time limit, I will ask few questions to the our eminent speakers. So these are the open questions. Kajal Srivastav asked a question, that is, what are the recommendations we are making at policy level to curb this situation? Anyone can take. Rubina ma'am can take.
Policy. The question is like, obviously the policy decisions, policymakers will come up with the regulations, then guidelines. We already have a guideline for high fat, salt and sugar foods, that and also now we have recently come up with the regulation on safe food in school, in and around school. So that's how it's going to be addressed. And at the same time, trans fat, that is already being taken care of. Like industry has already taken a pledge, and we have done a surveillance recently on oils and other foods, and they are already complying with this regulations.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next question is directed to Khalid sir.
Sir.
Other than cardiovascular diseases, the question is asked by Dr. Faisal Syed. In addition to cardiovascular diseases, FOPL can help in prevention of which other diseases?
Important. There is already an established observational data. The Spanish study is there. There's studies from Japan and other places. Hypertension, well established, and association. Obesity, very well epidemiologically proved association. Diabetes mellitus, already a well-known association. These are the These are the cardiovascular illnesses besides the cardiovascular diseases. Then depression. Depression is one of the diseases. Then cancers. Out of the cancers, this was not my topic actually. Cancers, CA breast, not CA colon and CA prostate. We usually attribute the CA colon to the intake of the meat and other things, but the data is clear for this thing. Now I will elaborate on the things more. The Italian study, the Molisani study, what did they find? They had a very surprising observation of finding that cystatin C is one of the very important markers of an early renal damage. There is a study from Tehran lipid glucose group, Molisani study, and from Japanese. Even those people who are not diabetics, I want to reiterate, who have been taught the diabetic nephropathy. Those people, individuals who consumed a lot of glucose or a lot of sugar present in the ultra-processed food, who are otherwise non-diabetic by the current definition, all these individuals can have some kind of a renal damage, some kind of a nephropathy, as shown by the rise in the cystatin C in these kinds. There is much more. There are many other lot of GI illnesses. There are a lot of GI illness and other things which occur. There is something what is known as the Priality syndrome. Priality syndrome is another condition where a person feels weak and easy fatigability, no other reason. One of the problems of an ultra-processed food. Thank you, thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next question is, it is asked by Khalid Bashir from Jammu and Kashmir. Can we put warning message bluntly vis-a-vis diseases associated with the particular food package, unhealthy ingredients, toxins, carcinogenic substances, etc.? I think Rubina ma'am is a better person to answer.
No, you cannot put it as randomly, that whatever is being specified as per the regulation, like warning signals, say sometimes we have added sugars, like we have sweeteners. So there we have to give a warning signal that not recommended for children. It's like that. So whatever is being specified in the regulation, that has to be put on the label, not that we need to actually we cannot just make the scary things on food, like which will actually averse people or consumers will not be accept that. So we have to see the both factors, trade factor as well as the health factor. Even though public health is much more, has a priority over other things, but at the same time, the fair trade practices also have to be followed.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next question has been asked from all maximum from Jammu and Kashmir, that is Sheikh Muhammad Salim. Dr. Salim has been asked that, just like cigarette packages, ma'am, whether it is possible to put the percentage label on a packet, how much FOPL will be there for easy visibility of the customers.
See, that is what in my presentation, I have already shown that what will be in the draft FOPL, how it will be once it is approved. If this is the mechanism, this is how we will be having it on our package, like part 1 and part 2. In part 1, it will be the servings energy levels, and then part 2 will be the percentage RDA. So it has to be like that.
Thank you, ma'am. And another question has been asked, that is, any Asian countries has used this FOPL system?
I have already shown you in my presentation, like there are some countries where they are still already using it, where it is a mandatory, or they
Asian
have
countries,
used.
ma'am. Asian,
I have to just check it, because there is a list of countries where they are using. Just hold on, I'll just tell you about who is actually where they are using it or not. So there are some countries where they are already using it. Yeah, Asian countries, but I don't remember exactly which countries.
Okay.
But if there is time, I can just tell you that.
No issue, ma'am.
Okay.
Dr. Pradeep sir, can I take more question or I have to stop? Pradeep sir.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead with vote of thanks.
A few more questions you can take. I have still time.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So
OS is the boss.
Okay. Another question has been asked by Kajal Srivastava. What recommendation we are making at policy level to curb this issue? Oh, sorry, I have asked this question previously. Another question has been asked regarding job loss to especially Dr. Khalid sir. What is the possibility of job loss? Because we are in poor country and many workers are working in this packaging factories or processed factories, ultra processed food we take. So what is the possibility of job loss?
So this is a very, very serious question. Actually, very important question. Actually made for the macroeconomists and the macro managers. Not directly for me, but I will try to answer the question. The point is, we have to understand what is DALY. What is disability adjusted life years? Coronary artery disease, hypertension, diabetes, they are responsible for a premature disability. They are responsible for in any patient population. Most of the disabilities and most of the problems occur in less than 70 years of the age. There's the Harvard Medical School gave it, then it went to WHO about this disability index. Once a person begets an MI at the age of around 40 or 45, he is not disabled. There is not the loss of the working hours. What is the amount of the money to be spent on that person after the disability occurs? We don't look at that aspect of it. One. Two, is that this job is a very big trick. I think I'm not here to raise the finger. The FDI, foreign direct investment, is saying that use ultra processed food in India. If we know that only a happy and a healthy society will be economically vibrant, which is now a data. This is not a slogan. This is macroeconomics. That I have the papers to show that hypertension will impact the macroeconomics of a society. I have a data to show that diabetes will have an impact on the macroeconomics of a society. I have a data to show that coronary artery disease affects the macroeconomic. Get a healthy society, the GDP of the society will increase. I will show of the deficiency data. There is a society somewhere in China or somewhere else where they supplemented the iodine in that era to an iodine deficient belt. The GDP of the area increased after a few years. I believe nothing like a healthy society getting us a better GDP, the job and other things become this. It's a very dangerous corporate trick.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind inputs. So now we are moving to the vote of thanks. So it was a wonderful session and we express our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Samia Rashid ma'am, Principal and Dean, GMC Srinagar, Jammu and Kashmir, for accepting our request to the guest of honor for national webinar addressing cardiovascular diseases through front of package labeling in India, hosted jointly by GMC Srinagar and AIIMS Rishikesh. Thank you, Dr. Khalid Mohiuddin sir, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Cardiology, GMC Srinagar, and Dr. Rubina Sahin ma'am, Ex-Technical Director, FSSI, our keynote speakers, for making all of us aware about the cardiovascular diseases and front of package labeling in India. I hope all participants are agree with me that it was a privilege to listen our keynote speakers of the consultation. I extend my special thanks to Dr. Salim Khan sir, Professor and Head, Department of Community Medicine, GMC Srinagar, who agreed to organize this webinar on a very short notice. Your deemed presence has facilitated the discussion to achieve its desired goal, objectives, and outcomes. Our special thanks to Dr. Pradeep sir, Associate Professor and Project Lead, AIIMS Rishikesh, and the entire team who have been worked day and night for conducting this webinar. Finally, I want to extend my special thanks to all the participants for showing your keen interest in this event, without which none of us would have come this far. I also request to all the participants, please make sure to fill and submit your feedback form, link shared in the chat box. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being with us for this 1.5 hour session. My gratitude to the Principal Investigator, Dr. Pradeep Agarwal, Dr. Sudeep for coordinating this. My thanks, special thanks to Dr. Khalid and Dr. Rubina. Thank you very much. And mainly, I would say main thanks to the Principal Dean Government College for being with us and for supporting us for holding this workshop. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. And lastly, my all participants in this workshop from my department and for all other guests for making this a wonderful event. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.